Welcome to another edition of the Black Male Podcast. I'm your host, AP. Today's show is going to be on perspective versus perception. The last show that I did was on process versus progress, and in the way that we will start from one to get to the other. So process begins where we are, and within that process, we get to the progress of where we are, where we want to be. And that will help us, in our lives and things like that, and the things that we want to achieve. But today we're going to talk about perspective and perception. Now, what starts first? What comes before the other? Sometimes people will say, what comes first, the chicken or the egg, right? So I'm going to tell you what comes first. Perception is developed before your perspective, because your perception is what you see and what you believe. Right? And then that will lead into your perspective. Your perspective is an overall view of how you view or see things. Your perception is how it comes to you. It is a derivative of your senses. So I'm going to go ahead and give you a definition of that. Okay. Perception. Perception is the ability to see, hear, or become aware of something through senses. Okay. Your perspective is a particular attitude towards or a way of regarding something or a point of view. So my perspective is how I see things. My perception is based on my beliefs, and how those beliefs brought to us. It can be something that we experienced. It can be something that we were taught. It can be something that we have lived through, and now that's based on how we go through those things. So my perception and my perspective lend to each one of them, to each other, and it also helps with my process and my progress, which is the earlier two P's that I covered. Is going to be the same thing. Now, why are we thinking about my perception and my perspective, and why are those things important? Those things are important based on our process and our progress and where we want to be, and why are they linked together? So those four P's actually work well within each other. They're when the confine and the constructs of what we do. Most times when we have that, we have our perception is something that's our belief that we go through, and we will see things based on our beliefs, as I said before, and our perspective is how we view those things. Think about the time when you have any time in your life and you have this particular perception of something. And it can be something that was brought to your attention, or it could be something that you viewed from an outsider's point of view. So a lot of people's perception is their reality, and they form their beliefs on that. And it can be something that's either false, it can be something that's reality, it can be something that was word of mouth. But how many times have you based something of your energy based on someone else's perception? Think about yourself. I'm going to tell you myself, I really don't care at this stage of my life what someone perceives of me. I've gotten to a point to where I'm comfortable with myself, and if they don't like it, then that's them. Now, I used to care about that a long time ago, but in my stage of development, I don't care about it anymore. Because at the end of the day, what is their perception of me going to do for me? Not a thing. And it can be a friend or a family member. It doesn't matter. What is someone's perception of you going to do for you? Not at all. I watched a clip of Kyrie Irving, and Kyrie was being interviewed by a reporter after a game. And the reporter asked a question, and he answered it in like the best way possible. He said sort of the same thing. He said, why am I concerned with someone else's perception of me when they really don't even know me? We get caught up with trying to please and appease certain people for the idea that their perception of us, or to have being a good light with someone that's not even going to do anything for us. Some of us grew up in the era where they said you never get a second chance at a first impression. And that is good for some things, but it's not good for everything. My impression is who I am, not what I do. And some people, based on their level of effort or energy or assistance to you, is based on their perception of you. And in their perception of you, that's where they base their perspective of you, and then they try to build your character on that. But it doesn't necessarily mean that they're right. That's just how they view it. Now, let's go back again. Let's go back to Kyrie. Kyrie answered that in the best way possible. And the reason why he answered that is because he answered it in a way that everyone, no matter if you're a basketball player, if you played any sports, anything like that, you would answer that as well. I was a slave to the mindset of thinking that I had to appease to other people. But as soon as I broke out of thinking that it didn't matter what someone else's perception of me was, I was free. And that thinking right there liberated him. And you can tell when he said that he actually lived through that, because he's speaking with his words. And when I say speaking with his words, he's living in his own moment and he's living in his truth. And with living in that truth, he's able to acknowledge the things that has happened for him and not just to him. And this is one of the most talked about, one of the most scrutinized, one of the most revered people that we have in sports. And he's able to own the things that have been for him. Now I've said that about myself. I'm okay with that. I'm also okay with knowing who I am and where I am in my life. If you think about, there's a quote out there that says, I will not allow my family to dictate the family that comes from me. And that says a lot. So that means the perception that I have within my own family, I'm in charge of the perception that's given. But even someone else's perspective or their perception of me can be absolutely false. And it really shouldn't matter what it is. It should matter to me. My perception of me, that doesn't mean that you're arrogant or entitled or other things, because other people's perspective is going to be that of you. What that means is that you know what you have to do for yourself. Okay, we have these acronyms. YOLO, you only live once, right? But if you continue to do things and you live up to other people's perspective and their perception, it's going to be a yo-yo. You're on your own. And what that means is you're going to lean and depend on them to be there for you. And they can't even be there for themselves. So why am I concerned or really unable to think about the things that I need to do for myself, or worried about what their perspective or perception of me is because there's something that's missing inside of me. See, I can have something inside of me. I can have all the right tools and everything that I need to do. But if I don't have that particular perception of me and my perspective is different, then I'm going to be open for anything to come to me. And that's not something that I'll need to do. That's something that I want to do, because I still have to protect myself. And with protecting myself, I know that these are the things that need to occur. And with these things that need to occur, I'm going to be myself. Okay. So I'm going to tell you why last week's show is the same as this week's show, why they go together. Okay. Now, perception and process are actually the same thing. Okay. Perception is the process of selecting, organizing, and interpreting information from our senses. Okay. Focusing attention on certain sights, sounds, tastes, touches, or smells in your environment. Something that seems especially noticeable and significant is considered a salient. So your perception and the process of things are the same, which means that perspective and progress is the same thing as well, because they're interchangeable and they dance with each other, should I say. And the reason why they dance with each other is because they're one and the same, as I said before. My process and my perception is something that's going to lend to the senses that I have, and also is going to lend to how I view and see things based on how I feel or the environment around me. It's going to be very important. If I am going to be a certain thing, or if I'm going to live a certain way, something's going to dictate that to me, right? I'm going to either live with it or I'm going to succeed from it. And when I say live with it, that means that I'm just going to be comfortable with where I am. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go ahead and strive to do anything different than anyone else that's in that particular situation or in that environment Case in point, you know that plenty of people from the environments we live from, or the environments that we come from, they are comfortable living the life that they have. They don't want anything more than what they have. They're not reaching for anything else. That doesn't make them bad people. That's just the life that they want to live. And that's okay with them, right? So the process that they've gotten is that I'm just comfortable being where I am. And that's okay, right? Everybody's not going to see it that way. And everybody's not going to want to do or envision their life in that manner. But for those of us that do want to have something different or better than what we have been given, then what that means is we're going to go through a state in an opportunistic change phase that we have to go ahead and work through the process so that our perception is lending us an listening ear. And when I say a listening ear, it's opening our senses so that we can see things clearer. If I'm truthfully honest with myself, then my perception is black and white. See, most people lend their perception based on what they know and their experience and how they view things of what's been taught to me. That doesn't mean that they're right. It just means that that's the way that they see those things. And with seeing those things that way, they could be completely false or they could be spot on. For instance, there's nothing that pisses me off more than someone who refuses to listen. Right? That upsets me to the 10th degree. And the reason why is based on either their knowledge of not being right or just want to say the first thing coming to their mind. And even when you correct them, they still have an issue with that. Because in their light, well, this is what they said. They have to be seen in a light. So then let's take it back. Why do they feel like they need to say things in the manner in which they say them? Okay, they're probably saying it because they never probably ever had a voice. They were probably never in a position where they can speak freely, or they probably was never in a position where somebody will actually listen to them. But with that, and in their problem, in their notion of knowing that who they are, they'll just freely say something. And I just heard something the other day, and I'm sitting there like, that's not the same thing. That's completely different. But it was something to where they wanted to be heard and they want to be out there in there. So that's how a lot of misinformation gets sent out. Think about when someone says something about you, about your character, about someone else's character and someone else's perception that leads to your perspective of them. And they can be completely wrong. And then when that person finds out that they're completely wrong, they don't come back to fix anything that was broken. They won't even say anything that will lend back to, okay, yeah, you know what? I was wrong, because those two words are the hardest words in our languages. I'm sorry and I'm wrong, right? And until we get to a certain part of our life that we're comfortable with saying those things like, you know what? I was wrong. And I'm okay with saying I'm wrong. When I was younger, I couldn't say that. I would say everything else, but you're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Those words are very difficult. Now, as a man, I can tell you that that's very difficult. That was difficult for me to say a long time ago. But the older I got, I knew that it was important for me to acknowledge that, but also to acknowledge that my perception was completely false, or my perspective was false as well. But that happened. That just happened a couple of days ago. And how many times have we been in a situation where you're listening to something, you know flat out that that's not true, and based on someone else's perspective that they shouldn't even be saying that, because they didn't even have the right perception of something. Some people just like to talk. And some people just want to be heard. And even with wanting to talk and be heard, they're completely false. And they're like, that don't even make any sense. Like, you can't even believe the words that come out. I know you shouldn't believe the words that's coming out your mouth, because I don't believe them at all. Because that doesn't even make sense. Like, you flat out know what you're saying. You know what you're saying is false. But you're trying to convince me in order to get likes or whatever, but you're trying to convince me of something that we all know is wrong. Now that's manipulation. You talk about gaslighting, that is gaslighting. I talked about that like shows ago. That is gaslighting, is when I truthfully want to manipulate you in order for you to see something my way and to get my desired result. That's what that is. Gaslighting ain't nothing else but that. Like, she really tried to gaslight us, but was completely false. And then when somebody corrected her, she's like, Oh, had nothing to say. And that's what I'm saying. A lot of times people do those things. They're loud, but they're wrong. And even when they're caught and they're wrong, what happens is they have nothing else to say. They be quiet. They sit in that shell of themselves. Well, I ain't going to say nothing else. I'm going to be cautious of what I say. You should be cautious of what you say because you're wrong. And the reason why you're wrong is someone else is going to catch what you're saying and what you're doing. Right? That's not to stop someone to be a fact finder or something like that. But what's right is what's right. Okay? There's a couple of things when we have conversations or a couple of things in our lives that's always going to be seen. The truth will always be out there and lies will always be out there. But a truth will always be the truth no matter what comes by, no matter who says it. And a lie will always reveal itself. Okay? Sometimes some people will say, let me go ahead and think about the time when someone were to tell me a truth or a lie. But in that time, when you think about the time when somebody told you a truth or a lie, this is what you should do. When you know something is categorically wrong, excuse me, and you know someone is saying something they should not be saying, eventually that truth is going to come out because you have to tell a lie, and the way you tell that lie is that person has to live that lie, right? It's so much easier for people to tell the truth and their perception that they can get over you and the perception that someone is going to have of them, of being this completely different person. But then in your perspective, when you really see that person, you're going to be like, that person wasn't who I really thought it was, who I thought they were, because they didn't have to lie like that. They didn't have to tell that. They could have just told the truth. If someone is how they are, they should just be that way. And the fact that some people feel like they have to be something that they're not, that means that they're missing something. Something inside them they're missing. They need something, right? Something that they're not getting. It could be attention. It could be affection. It could be anything. It could be love. At the end of the day, it's something that's stopping them from being the person that they want to be. But what they're doing is they're using tricks in order to confuse people, right? There's somebody that everybody runs from, but some people don't even want to acknowledge that person is there. That's the devil, right? And the devil's good with perception and perspective, right? His perspective is, and they don't care what religion you believe in, don't care what religion you believe in. The devil's perspective is what? To take souls, right? That's a perspective of him, right? His perception is what? What are our perception of the devil? It's based on what we've been taught, based on what we've read, based on the things that we know and we've come about, right? Oh, that's devilish behavior, or that's this, right? But a lot of people don't realize that the devil was an angel too. So the devil is playing both sides of the coin. So he knows certain things that you don't know, but he wants to get you from having that because of where he was or where he is right now. All right. I know that was a little sidebar, but it's just an example for you to understand where I'm going with this, right? Okay. So the process and the perception that you have for yourself is based on belief, all based on belief. The progress that you attain to and that you ascend to and your perspective in that is the time frame. Okay. So we'll lend those two things together. Process and perception will lead to my progress and my perspective. Because if I see myself in a certain area or a certain place, then maybe I will change how I'm doing certain things within myself or maybe for myself so that I can get to my desired route, right? Because that's going to help me. That's going to help me. Okay. Now, what point in your life are you in that process and that progress? What point are you with your perspective? Where are you with your perspective? And I'm going to tell you how all these intertwine, because they are all cousins. You could say they're brothers and sisters, but they all relate to each other. These 4 P's, right? Okay, so I'm going to tell you, perspective comes after perception. Okay, in other words, perception leads to perspective. It is our point of view that we build on our perception. Okay, but that perception allows people to take the sensory information and make it into something meaningful, right? Because what I perceive is my reality. If I perceive that you are a good-looking person, then that's going to be my reality, even though I know that that's completely false. I'm going to see what I want to see based on my belief. Then when they say seeing is believing, that's pretty much what that means. I have to go off what I believe is true, right? I can't go off of what someone else says, because in my perception of something, it's going to fuel my perspective. And in my perception of that, if my process is all off, then my progress is not going to be anything. That's why those things interchange. That's why they intertwine with each other, right? But it is a unique combination, as my notes say, of our experiences and our beliefs and our values and cultural background, which is very important, that shapes our understanding of ourselves and others. Our perspective influences not only how we interpret and make sense of the world, but also how we respond to it. Okay. How do you think people respond to you when they see you, or they see your name come across their screen on their phone? Okay. I can tell you, when I see certain people called, and I'm like, I don't want to talk to this person. I don't want to talk. I don't even want to hear what they got to say. I know it's about to be a bunch of foolishness, right? How many of you guys have that same notion? How many of you guys have that same thing? Oh, here we go with this shit again, right? It's probably in your mind. And some people think that. But when you think that, why is that? Is it the perception that they've given off, or the perception you have and that's linked to your perspective of them as a person, right? Because their initial characteristics are faulty or false because of the things that they've done, right? But that happens, okay? But we want to think about why our perception and our perspective is important, okay? But there's a reason why they're important, okay? Because one can be an emotional response to something, and the other can be fact-based relations, okay? So here's another step. Okay, the power of your perspective is when we realize different perspectives, we can see more clearly, have more compassion, be more understanding, enjoy more freedom, and communicate better. Okay, we're more creative and in control of our choices, and usually more appreciative, positive, and happier when our perspective is freer, when we're more open. We'll go back to that Kyrie Irving statement that I said about his perception. How free is he to live and to be based on how he thinks and how he's worried about and not worried about someone's perception or perspective of him? He's at a peaceful point of his life. And you can say at pretty young, at 30 something years old, maybe 40, maybe we'll have to Google it and see how old he is, right? But still at an early age, and now that things are changing for him to have that idea and that thought process that this is where I am, this is what I want, and this is the person I'm going to be. Because everybody's going to live your life on your own. People are going to want to see you in certain avenues, quote unquote, your parents, right, or your family. But you have to live your life yourself. And the perception you have with them, or the perception you have of life, is how you're going to live it. It's going to formulate your perspective of things, how you're going to go about and live life. Because you have to be happy with the life that you have. And no one else can be happy with the life you have but you. But that's important to know as well. That's important for us to live through, but that's also important for us to own. And if we don't own that, then we have that different type of perspective and perception, which we don't want to do that. We want to have the things that we want to have because we want to have it, right? Okay, let me get back to some more notes. Do you guys know that there's 3 stages of perception? There's selection, organization, and interpretation, okay? The perception process is both cognitive and psychological. It can influence how we communicate with ourselves and others. That's twice I done said communicate. That's twice I just said communicate not so long ago. Now, with communication I really think that communication is it's a lost art form. And based on that lost art form is how I present something and how you're going to receive that. So if I'm going to give you some information, even if you know that it's quote unquote not true, it's how you receive that information and what you do with that. Case in point, that conversation I just told you when someone was completely wrong. And even though they were told that they were wrong, they had nothing to say after that. That wasn't me that corrected that. That was someone else that corrected it. But the sense and the idea that we have that we can say whatever we want to, and our communication is the way that we have it. Like, who says that that person can say those things? They have that on themselves. They also have it where they want to be in the right, always right, and no one else can say anything based on status, based on where they are. A lot of people like to have titles and think that titles are what entitle me to say certain things that I need to. But if I am in a position where, as like an adult, but like a parent or a grandparent, I should be more cognizant of the words that I use. The reason being is you are going to be revered because of the title that you have, right? What brings you or make you special to other people is their perception of you, right? And that will lead to their perspective. And what I mean by that is, if I'm going to sit here and say something to someone, I want to make sure I reach everyone. If I have, for instance, I have 5 kids. Each one of those 5 kids is going to be completely different, right? But when you put them all together, then what you're going to say is, okay, these are my children, right? But each child has a different way that I can reach them. I have a different way I can reach them. You're not going to reach every child the same. Even if they're like twins or triplets or whatever, you're not going to reach them because they all are individuals. They all have their own individual life that they're going to live, right? So with my kids, I know I can say something to one of them. The other one, I'm going to talk a little bit differently. The other one, I can say very little. The other one, I have to explain a lot to. And the other one, I just probably have to look at. And that's it. And that's me knowing that. Now, their perception of me will be of dad, right? But their perception of dad is going to be completely different of me, right? Because of what they're receiving from me. So when you give of yourself and people see yourself, they're going to base that perception based on their belief. And then it's going to form their perspective of you. If anyone were to come and say something about that, because that is what also lends to your character. Because of your perspective, their perspective and your character is going to go hand in hand. So when someone comes in and says something, oh, this is not this person because this person doesn't do this, and I believe that this person is not that type of person because of my perception of them. How many people perceive that people are good or bad? Even in our perception, when we were told someone was no good for us and we shouldn't talk to them and we did it anyway, we didn't see it that way, right? Maybe because our eyes were wide shut, or maybe we want to give that person a fair shake, or we thought that, you know what, that was with them, not me, whatever, blah, blah, blah. But eventually, when we wake up and we open our eyes, we can see certain things based on not just the perception that they have, but the perspective we formed based on what they showed us. And that happens to us all the time. That can happen to us at work. That can happen to us with our friends. That can happen to us with someone we want to get with. Anything. That's just life. That is life. Especially people, if you are a manager and you manage people, the number one thing that people will say, they will say any and everything they can in order to be in a certain spot. But when they get in that spot, they are completely different. And when you talk to them and the words that they use, you can look at them and say, I know you don't believe the stories you're telling me. So what makes you think I'm going to believe that? That gets you to a different level in your life, but also with dealing with people. Because a lot of people really think they can just throw the rug over your eyes and you're not going to see anything. But you can see it clearly because your eyes are not wide shut. Okay? You're paying attention. Okay? Now, can my perception lead to a misunderstanding? Of course it can. Of course it can. Because like I said, they're based on beliefs, right? Because people tend to attribute intentions and actions of others based on their own interpretations, okay? Predispositions and emotional states. This attributable process can lead to a misunderstanding and miscommunication, laying the groundwork for a conflict to arise. Now, how many times has someone had the wrong or the false idea about someone or something and it led to a misunderstanding or a fight or something else? A lot of times. A lot of times. You could think about the time in your life, you could think about the time in someone else's life, or you can think about it, what is most closely to you, right? You can think about work, you can think about home, you can think about business, you can think about anything. It happens everywhere. right? A misinterpretation of something based on someone's perception. And why is that important, right? Because that perception, that process, they're like brother and sister. They're twins, right? And perspective and progress are twins too. But that perception can either halt or delay a process based on where I am. If your perception of someone is that you want to be with them or you want to talk to them, but you're not sure, that's going to delay that process. If you want to have a better job or where you are, and your perception is, well, I don't know if I want to do it here because this job is not the greatest for me, and I see the way they do things. I'm just trying to do what I can do so I can get out of here. That's going to delay your progress in what you're doing because you're sitting somewhere you don't want to be. Right? Not until you're waiting or you're hoping for something to open up will you then say, well, I think I'll go and do something else. But that's too late. Because if you wait too late, what's going to happen is your perception of things can change, right? Because everything is time-based. So my perception over time can change. My process will change due to time. Okay? The progress is the length of time that I take. And my perspective is lent from a space and time and a limit of where I'm going to go and what I've had to base it on. Okay? So those are all intertwined. They're all interchanged. They all lend with each other. Okay? But how can my perspective change and affect my life? It can. Okay? Your perspective determines your thoughts, and your thoughts create a chain reaction that leads to taking actions. Actions that make you feel either good or bad about yourself and your life. Cognitive behavior therapy is called a behavior loop or maintaining process. Okay, so again, my perspective can change the way I view myself and also view other things that can affect my life. Meaning, my perspective from my perception of things is either I'm going to go and give more energy and effort to something, or I'm going to draw that energy and effort back from what I'm doing. And that's also about that process and that progress. So there's your example and how they all lend with each other and how they play with each other. Okay. So I'm going to leave you with this last thing. I covered 2 P's last week. And I covered 2 P's this week. Okay. So your process goes to your progress. Your perception leads to your perspective. But what leads to yourself? Have you ever thought about yourself being in a spot or in an avenue where you are happy with yourself and where you are? And the reason why you may not be happy with that is based on what you've been told, what you see, and what you believe, which are all emotional states, which you can change those things, right? And with changing those things, you can be a better version of yourself for yourself. See, the complete and entire thing, the reason why I say that, to have that better version of yourself, is for you to be happy and satisfied with you. Because just like I said last week, just getting somewhere is like the tip of the iceberg. Like, I just got the surface of it. I don't know what's underneath or underlying underneath that. What that means is once I uncover everything and I really dig deep in where I am, then I know where to start, I know where to go, and I want to see how it looks. But that means even when I have speed bumps or roadblocks in my way, and I get a step and I have a setback, that doesn't mean that I go all the way back. That means, okay, I got knocked down, but I'm finna get up. But when I get back up, I'm gonna get back up better, sharper. So if I have another setback, I can recoup or rebound from this faster and better than I did the last one. Okay, so understand your process that leads to your progress, but that perception will develop and lend to your perspective. Okay, that'll be our show for this week. Join me next week for the show on self. This is AP for the Black Male Podcast, and as always, be good to yourself and others. Peace.